Hi, David here, and welcome back to the channel where we're looking at the teaching of divine love through the automatic writings of the early 20th century medium James Padgett. In the last Sunday video, 1018, we looked at two messages, one from Paul and the other from Peter, both given through James Padgett on October 26, 1915. Today, we're going to take a look at a message given to James from the Apostle Matthew, given just a week later on November 2, 1915. There are very few messages from Matthew. The only published one we have before this date was a very short one a few months earlier, on July 20, 1915. Matthew's November 1915 message begins as follows. I am here, St. Matthew. I have not written you for a long time, and I desire to say a few words on matters pertaining to the soul and its relationship to God, and future life and immortality. The soul is an image of the great soul of God, and partakes of features of this great soul, except that it does not necessarily have in it the divine love that makes the soul of a mortal or spirit a partaker of divinity. The soul may yet exist in a mortal or spirit in all receptive qualities, and yet never have the divine essence fill it, which is necessary in order to make a mortal or spirit a new creature. That is the subject of the new birth. Apparently, during their earthly lives, Matthew was the chatty one among the apostles, and he has packed a lot into those two short sentences. The first thing Matthew tells us is that the human soul is an image of God, or made in the image of God, which is a very traditional Christian teaching. But what does it mean? All Matthew says at this stage is that the human soul partakes of features of the great soul of God. He doesn't tell us precisely what features those might be, because the point Matthew wants to get across just now is that the human soul does not automatically share in the divine nature or the essence of God, by which he means divine love. We can choose to share in God's essence, but the point Matthew wants to get across is that this has to be our free choice. Human and divine are different, and this is the point being alluded to in the teaching that we are made in the image of God, but not of God's substance, divine love. In recent decades, it has been a very popular idea to assert that because we are human, therefore we are divine. But all of the higher spirits who communicate through James Padgett are clear that this is a mistake. Human and divine are different, and to conflate them, treat them as though they are the same, is to err. The thing they want us to be clear about is that we are human, therefore not divine, but that we can choose to become divine through sharing in God's love. Being born again, or reborn, is what happens as a result of that process. And this is not just a metaphor, it is a real transformation in terms of what one's soul is made of. God's love, divine love, that essence or substance of God, is not just metaphor or emotion. It is a real force or energy, just as real as light or heat. And when we seek it, ask for it, choose to share in it, we become it. Matthew tells us that every soul has this capability, this receptive quality, as he calls it. Yet a soul will never share in the divine essence if that is not what it chooses. Matthew also speaks of mortals and spirits. This is his way of distinguishing between us embodied mortals upon this earth, mortals, as distinct from those who have passed on to the world of spirits. Spirits, naturally enough. However, it is worth pointing out that many, if not most people in spirit, are just as mortal as most people walking upon the earth. Matthew goes on to explain this as follows. Only that mortal or spirit who has received this divine love can be said to be immortal. All others may live or they may not. When a soul shares in the divine essence, divine love, it comes to be made of something that brings with it the attribute of a personal immortality. And as that soul grows in that substance, it becomes consciously aware of its own immortality. A soul who does not share in divine love is not immortal, merely continuing to live for as long as God makes provision for it to continue doing so. This is true regardless of whether that soul is an embodied soul living upon the physical earth, or whether it is a soul that has passed to spirit, and who continues to be expressed through its spiritual body. Matthew continues, "It has not yet been revealed to us whether the life or existence of these spirits, who have not the conscious knowledge of immortality, will continue to live through all eternity. And if they do, it will be because God so wills that they shall. Their existence will be subject to change, and if such change should take place, only God knows what its character will be. While, on the contrary, the soul that has acquired immortality can never die. Its status as to a life through all eternity is fixed, and even God himself cannot destroy that existence, because it is the possessor of that divinity which makes God immortal." That's a striking thing for Matthew to say, but it's also a logical consequence of what a soul who shares in divine love has become. A soul who shares in divine love to any extent is, to that extent, made of the same stuff as God, and will therefore last as long as God does, which those communicating through James Padgett tell us is forever. By contrast, the soul who chooses not to share in divine love is dead to the possibility of what it might become. As Matthew says, "The soul that sinneth, sinning it shall die," a quotation from the Old Testament book of Ezekiel 18:4, means that the qualities that are necessary for it to make it a part of immortality can never come to it, and hence, as regards these qualities, it is dying and dead. In describing a mortal soul as sinning or dead, what Matthew means is that being alive but mortal is not what he would call being truly alive, and to refuse the choice of immortality through being at one with God is to choose to remain dead to the possibility of living fully. Of course, mortal spirits do pass to spirit, which Matthew acknowledges, saying, "The soul itself will live, for no spirit could possibly have an existence without a soul." And when men attempt to teach that when the spirit of life leaves the body, the soul dies, such men do not state a truth. The soul will live as long as the spirit existence continues, and until the great change, should there be one, comes to that spirit. So all men must believe that the soul which God gave to man is just as much a part of man as is the spiritual or physical body. So Matthew is countering those who insist that there is no afterlife, who claim that we have no soul, or that when the body dies, there is nothing left of the person that was. "No," says Matthew, "anyone saying that could not be more wrong. He then adds that the soul is the highest part of man, and is the only part that in any way resembles God, who is not body or spirit body in form, but is soul. That's an interesting point, that God is what we might call pure soul. God has no physical form, nor does God have a spirit form. Direct awareness of God comes at the soul level, because the soul is the only part of us that in any way resembles God or is in God's image. It takes a soul to recognize a soul. It takes a divine soul to recognize divinity. When Matthew speaks of a soul being dead or not alive to the possibility of becoming divine, he is speaking metaphorically. Matthew explains this, saying, "So you see that when we speak of destroying the soul, it does not mean that the soul belonging to every spirit will be destroyed, and the potentiality of that soul receiving the divine love and the nature of God. The soul can be starved and placed in a condition of stagnation, so that all its receptive powers will be, as it were, dead, and only some great miracle or unusual ministration can awaken it. But to say that the soul ever dies may be erroneous. In saying this, there is the possibility of some great change in the spirit of mortals, by which such spirit may be destroyed, and in such the soul will cease to exist as an individualized soul or entity." What Matthew is expressing here is not an expectation that mortal souls will cease to exist at some point in time, but simply that no one in spirit knows what might be the long-term plan for souls that do not choose to share in divine love. It is possible that at some point in the far distant future God will recall such souls, but then again, says Matthew, God, the great oversoul, may not recall to himself the soul of any man, in the sense of depriving that man of his soul, but his relation to that soul will be merely that of creator and created, subject always to the will of the Creator. Whereas the relationship of God towards the soul that has received the divine nature is not only that of a creator and created, but also that of a co-equal, so far as this great quality of immortality is concerned. I suppose one way of putting it is to say that for those of us who do not choose to share in divine love, there is no long-term certainty as to one's existence, and however long one continues to exist for, one's development or growth can only ever be partial, so long as the possibility of growing in God's essence is not explored. By contrast, for the soul who chooses to share in divine love, Matthew tells us that the soul of man then becomes self-existing and not dependent upon God for its continuance or continuing to exist. This, I know, is a subject not easy for the mortal mind to understand, but when you have received the soul perceptions in addition to your natural mind, it will not be so difficult to grasp the exact meaning of my propositions. I will not write more tonight. Your brother in Christ, St. Matthew. One of the obstacles that people in spirit always face is trying to use earthly language to explain things that they have experience of, but which those of us walking upon the earth tend not to have experience of, and which we haven't invented words for. Overcoming that obstacle is always going to be tricky, but in this fairly short message, Matthew does a good job of getting across a perspective that is the result of his being a soul who shares in divine love, and who lives in the higher spheres beyond the 7 spiritual ones, the celestial spheres, as they tend to be called in the Padgett messages. In this message, Matthew picks up on a lot of traditional Christian language, such as being made in the image of God, what it is for a soul to be dying or dead, what it is to be reborn or born again, what it is to be of one substance with God. But what he explains these as meaning or pointing to are things you are most unlikely to hear taught or preached in a traditional Christian church, even though these are central to what Jesus taught and teaches. So much has gone forgotten, but it is recoverable. The next video in this sequence, video 10:20, will look at a message from Luke, which was given to James Padgett about 4 weeks later, on November 22, 1915. In that message, Luke picks up on a message James received from his old law professor, Joseph Salyards, which we looked at in video 211. In that message, dated November 21, 1915, Professor Salyards asserted that God has personality and is not merely some formless essence without discernible qualities. Luke comes forward the following evening to give a detailed message affirming this and drawing upon his own experience so as to add to what Professor Salyards shared. The next midweek video, 220, will look at a message given through James Padgett from a spirit communicator by the name of Spencer, who comes through with advice for James's friend, Dr. Leslie Stone. So I hope you'll join me for one or both of those videos. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this one, please do take a moment to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It all helps to spread knowledge of this material, so it's good to join in the sharing. And just a quick reminder that if you look at the description box for each of these videos, you'll find a link to the transcript published on my Medium account. I know some of you find it useful to have that text while listening to the videos. I am planning to catch up on the podcast versions of these videos, which I upload to Podbean. As those are done, I add links to the video descriptions, but I am a little behind with those, so apologies for that, but they will appear. There is a lot in that message from Matthew, so thank you for persevering to the end with me, and I hope you enjoy reflecting upon what he has to say. It's an important message, and definitely worth revisiting. And that brings us to the end of today's video. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.